All right, final review for this SLO test. As you know, the test itself is not entirely multiple choice, but just gives you some chance to do a little bit more practice. For the first problem, we've got an exponential function. It says continuously, so we know it's going to have the e in it, and it says depreciates. So the original amount is the 14,500. That's not a negative amount. It's base e. Because it's depreciating, it is the percent that is negative, and then of course the value for t. So this one is hard to read, but it is a. And maybe you can't. There is a tiny little negative sign there. Which of the following is a true statement for number 2? This is just a quick little review of logs. When you divide, like in part A, this should be a minus sign, so it's not a. For part B, because the 7 has, or the y has the 7 power, the 7 should be only in front of the y, so it's not b. For part C, they put the natural log with the numerator and the denominator, so that's good. The dividing is subtracting, so they subtracted, and the square root is the 1/2 power, which is all the way out in front. So C right now looks like it might be the correct answer. And part D, 8 is a coefficient and not a power, so that doesn't work, so it's definitely C. Solving this natural log equation, remember you have to have the natural log or the common log, whichever one it is. It has to be by itself on one side. So we'll divide both sides by 5 first. So now we have the natural log of 2x equals 5. Remember, natural log is base e, and here we're going to swoop it out. So e to the 5th equals 2x, and then divide by 2. This needs to go into the calculator, and the answer is B. The zeros of the function are the same thing as x-intercepts or solutions. So you would take each factor and set each one equal to 0. The fact that those have powers doesn't mean anything in terms of the zeros. So we would get -2 and +3, or B. For number 5, taking and going the opposite direction, if you have the zeros, what would the factors look like? And remember, you always do the opposite. So we have an x equals, or we have a 0, so that would be x equals 0. So we need to have a single just x, which A doesn't have. Then we would need an x plus 6, an x plus 1, and we would need an x minus 1, and then your fractions. If you think about maybe something like 3x minus 2 equals 0, we would get 3x equals 2 and x equals 2/3. So when you have a fraction, you do not write x minus 1/2, for example. So you take the denominator and put that with the letter x. So then the next one would be 2x minus 1, and then we would have 2x minus 3. And so the fraction one is out. This has the wrong sign for part C, so it is part D. Horizontal asymptote, you can see obviously these are the y equals. So you're looking at the degrees. The degrees match the numerator and denominator. So when that happens, we really don't care about that part of the equation. It doesn't factor, so we don't have to factor it. And so we would get, the bottom doesn't factor. The top does, but the bottom doesn't, so we're not going to factor it. So we get 4x squared over 3x squared, and you ignore the x squared, so it's y equals 4/3. Another horizontal asymptote, remember it is the degree you want and not the first one necessarily, so don't be fooled. Here we have -6 on the top, -4 on the bottom for our x to the 4th. -6 over -4 is y equals 3/2. I believe that one has the wrong answer maybe on the back. One of them has the wrong answer, but we'll go through the correct way. The sign of 300, you can put that in your calculator. 300 is in the 4th quadrant. And we know that it is negative. Of course, they're all negative, but it is D. Another kind of simple little problem for the trig equations. Just isolate the word. So 2 cosine theta equals radical 3, so divide by 2. And so where does the cosine equal radical 3 over 2? That is 30. In all of the unit circle points, everything goes cosine, sine if it's on the unit circle. Now this doesn't work if it's just a regular triangle, but this is cosine and sine for the unit circle values, meaning the radius is 1, like they describe. And so that means the cosine is negative a. I believe maybe that's the wrong answer on the back, but there is the right answer. It's a. For amplitude and period for sine, amplitude for sine and cosine is the first one. So the amplitude is 2, so it's either A or D. The period is 2 pi over B is the formula. B is the number in front of the x. Whether it's inside the parentheses or not, it's just the number in front of the x. So we have 2 pi over 1 over pi over 2, and we'll simplify this. So we get 4 pi over 4. So the period is 4. So, oops, sorry, the period is 4 pi over 4. Wait a minute, it's not, it's 4 pi over pi, sorry. You can see that, and I can't apparently. So there it is, so just 4. Horizontal and vertical shifts in number 11. It goes up 5, so they all say up 5. And then since the value for B is outside the parentheses, it does not affect the left to right movement, so it just goes right 3. Now, number 13. This is a little trickier. This is your sum and difference identities. So we're going to need to draw these two triangles just so we can see what we have. Triangle A is in quadrant 1, and the sine is 3/5. This is a 3, 4, 5 right triangle. If you don't know that, use Pythagorean theorem to figure out your missing side. Triangle B is in the second quadrant, with the tangent being, of course, negative, because it's the second quadrant. I'm going to ignore the sine for a second. So the tangent, I'm just going to write it as 9 over 10. So Pythagorean theorem tells us this would be 81 plus 100 equals the hypotenuse squared, so radical 181. If you take a quick glance at the answers, if radical doesn't seem reasonable, you can see there's a radical 81 in at least some of the answers, so it feels like it's okay so far. So the formula for this, the property, the identity, looks like sine of A, cosine of B, plus cosine A, sine B. Sine, cosine, cosine, sine. When you go to put the numbers in, do not write the word. We are taking the sine of angle A, and the sine of angle A is positive 3/5. The cosine of triangle B is negative 10 over radical 181. The cosine of angle A is 4/5. And the sine of triangle B sine is positive here, so the sine is 9 over radical 181. Now you do have to multiply before you can add. I'm going to go up top here. So we get negative 30 over 5 radical 181 plus 36 over 5 radical 181. You can add up the numerator, so we get 6 over 5 radical 181. Now I would stop there because the answer is D, and you can see that's the only one with the 6 in the numerator. But to fix this, of course, you would rationalize, and you would multiply the top and the bottom by radical 181. 5 times radical 181 is 905. It's not going to tell you to use sum and difference identities. It's just going to look like this. With the word outside, looks like a distributive property, but you do not distribute the word. It does not work. Number 14, this is a side angle side picture, which is the law of cosines. So the retaining wall, x squared, is equal to the two sides squared, doesn't matter the order, 45 squared plus 30 squared minus 2 times 45 times 30 times the cosine of the angle, 105. Now you can type this into the calculator in one step if you just put it all underneath the radical sign. This will automatically obviously take the square root, and you won't have to worry about that. It does work out to be A. Number 15, we have an ellipse. So there's a plus sign that equals 1, and of course they all have a plus sign that equals 1. The center is at 1, negative 4, so we should have x plus 1 on the top and y minus 4 on the top, and we do have that with C. But I'm going to finish up the whole problem just to go through it. We know it's C, but it's probably not going to be that obvious on the test. So let's just take a quick glance at the picture. We have negative 1, 4, and that's the center, and a focus at negative 1, 7. So what that tells you is the distance from the center to the focus is C. So we know that C, not capital C, little c, is 3. Oh, we have a vertex at negative 1, 8. Didn't see that. So then the vertex is 1 more. So then the distance from the center to the vertex is A. So A equals 4. Since the ellipse looks like this somewhat, in terms of it's going up and down, that means underneath y squared would be a squared. So a squared should go underneath the y, and it's there. At that point, obviously there's 2 that have 16 in the bottom, but we know the center is correct. But I'll finish the problem again. This is c squared equals a squared minus b squared. So we know 9 equals 16 minus b squared. And when you subtract that, you get negative 7 equals negative b squared. And then there is your b value. One more of these, just for practice. This one is, of course, the hyperbola. We have a center at negative 2, 4. And we don't know which way it goes without maybe a picture. Maybe you can reason through it, but I'm going to graph this real quick. So we have a center at negative 2, 4. Focus at negative 2, negative 4. And a vertex at negative 2, negative 2. So this tells you that it goes up and down, right? So it's going to look like this. That's why they're so far apart, because remember, your hyperbola gets kind of crazy. So we're looking at up and down. So y has to come first. So we need it to be y minus 4 on the top. And that needs to be first. And of course, we have 2 of those. So it's not C. So we don't know if it's A or B at this point. The value for C, the distance from the center to the vertex, is 4. No, it isn't. It's 6. Sorry. So the value there is 6. So underneath y squared would be 36. And at that point, we have only one choice, which is A. The distance from the center to the focus is the value for C. And then you could use the formula, which would be C squared equals A squared plus B squared to find B squared. Magnitude and direction is the square root of A squared plus B squared, which is, you could call it radical 34 if you want, or you could make it a decimal. It doesn't tell you, 5.83. And the angle, of course, the tangent of the angle. Now please include the sign, 5 over negative 3. When you think about what this is positioned at, negative 3, 5, we're in the second quadrant. So you have to add 180 to that, and you get that the direction is 120.9 degrees. Resolving it back into its components is going the other direction. So we're going to have magnitude times cosine of the angle, and then magnitude times the sine of the angle. And of course, our angle's on the unit circle, so we're not going to have any decimals here. So 10 times the cosine of 225, and then 10 times the sine of 225. And the sine, or the cosine rather, of 225 is negative. They're both negative. So we have 10 times negative radical 2 over 2. So we get negative 5 radical 2, negative 5 radical 2. Make sure, since it's components, that you use the proper form. And again, number 10, just so you know, number 10 was really A. Sorry about the wrong answer.